Sometimes you prepare an entire program and are about to go on air in order to cover the topics for which you prepare, and at the last minute, major breaking news emerges that you simply can't ignore, and certainly tonight is a perfect case where that happened. Probably about 20 minutes ago at the most, 25 minutes ago, news broke that former FBI Director James Comey is now under federal indictment. A grand jury has returned an indictment on 2 of the 3 felony charges sought by the Trump Justice Department. One count of it is providing false statements either to Congress or to FBI investigators. The other is obstructing justice. And all of it has to do with allegedly false claims and deceitful information that Comey provided when the 2016 Russiagate investigation that took place during the 2016 campaign while he was FBI director that he oversaw, when investigations were taking place into how that investigation emerged, whether or not there were politicized corruption or other types of deceit and fraud, that he provided false information that misled investigators, misled Congress, and therefore obstructed justice, all of which are felonies. There was a third count that the Justice Department sought an indictment on, and the grand jury refused to indict him. So it's often said that grand juries will essentially indict anything that prosecutors ask for. Largely that's true. It's very, very difficult for a prosecutor to request a grand jury indict only for the grand jury to refuse, simply because by nature of a grand jury, there is no other side there. It's only the prosecutors, only the government presenting their version of events. You don't have cross-examination. You don't have the defendants presenting conflicting evidence, and there's no standard of beyond reasonable doubt, which is the standard for convicting somebody of a crime. It's a much lower standard, and so generally prosecutors can obtain the indictments they want, but not always, as evidenced by the fact that in this case, the grand jury did reject one of the 3 counts, but did indict Comey on 2 others. Now, at least as soon as we went on there, the indictment itself has not been released, so exact details of what the indictment provides is not known, but we know enough from the background of what has led up to this moment to be able to have a pretty clear understanding of what the nature of these charges are. It's obviously an extremely significant news event that a former director of the FBI has been indicted. It's particularly ironic since James Comey built his career on pursuing indictments very similar to the ones that he now faces. He did that with Martha Stewart. He did that with former General Michael Flynn, and in many other cases, bringing very dubious indictments. I'm not saying this is dubious, but bring very dubious indictments alleging false statements or perjury or obstruction of justice on big profile targets in order to advance his career. And now he himself faces and is required to swallow a lot of the medicine that he liked to dole out. Now, there is some background here that I think is very much worth understanding in order to assess this indictment. And namely, that key crucial background is that just a couple of days ago, Donald Trump, in a very public way, chastised his own Attorney General, Pam Bondi, for not having brought an indictment against James Comey yet, and essentially demanding that she do so, not just against Comey, but other people that Donald Trump has a lot of animosity toward, oftentimes for good reason. But this was a case where a president of the United States was not in secret interfering in the independence of the Justice Department, but very publicly demanding that his Attorney General bring indictments against people he wants to see indicted. Now, it doesn't mean the indictments are invalid at all. In general, we have a protocol or a tradition where presidents don't interfere in specific prosecutorial decisions of the Justice Department precisely to ensure that they can't abuse the Justice Department to prosecute or persecute their political enemies or to shield their political allies who have committed crimes. It's a protocol that really exists in name only. There are countless cases of essentially every president interfering in all sorts of ways in the Justice Department, so it's not one that I'm particularly shocked by or upset with, even though in general I think it's better that presidents don't do this. But here's what Donald Trump did in very Trumpian style, and if it's going to be done, I prefer that it be done in public and not in secret the way most presidents do it. He took to Truth Social on September 20th, so today is the 21st, I believe, so this is just yesterday. And he posted this, quote, Pam, meaning Pam Bondi, and there was a lot of questions as well, I have to say, about whether Trump thought he was sending her a personal email or whether he was deliberately posting it on Truth Social, because he directed it right to her. Though with Trump, he's not somebody who is easily predictable in terms of how he communicates, so it's very possible he did intend this to be public. And he wrote the following. Sorry, this was Saturday. So today's the 25th. So actually it was 5 days ago. He said this, quote, Pam, I have received over 30 statement and posts saying that essentially, quote, same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Shift, Letitia James? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. He was quoting people he was purportedly hearing from, presumably supporters who were angry, saying you keep talking a big game, but nothing's being done. These people aren't being indicted. And then Trump says in his own words, then we almost put in a Democrat-supported U.S. attorney in Virginia with a really bad Republican past, a woke rhino who is never going to do his job. And Trump is referring there to a prosecutor who was a top prosecutor in the, I believe, the Eastern District of Virginia, where these cases were pending, who had essentially concluded that there was not sufficient evidence to indict either Jim Comey or Letitia James. A prosecutor has an obligation to bring indictments only if they're reasonably certain they can obtain a conviction. And this prosecutor had written a memo saying he didn't think the evidence existed to justify an indictment either against Jim Comey or against Letitia James. And so Trump demanded his removal, replaced him with a loyalist of his from the White House who had never previously served as a prosecutor, and then issued these orders to the Attorney General to indict both James Comey and Letitia James, and that's what led presumably to Comey's indictment today. He went on. That's why two of the worst Democratic senators, meaning in Virginia, pushed this prosecutor so hard. He even lied to the media and said he quit and that we had no case. No, I fired him, and there is a great case, and many lawyers and legal pundits say so. Lindsay Halligan is a really good lawyer and likes you a lot. She's the White House aide, the personal attorney of Donald Trump, who he put in place of this prosecutor who left in the Eastern District of Virginia and who has now brought this indictment. He goes on, we can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. President DJT. I think it's hard to read that as anything other than a direct order from the president to the attorney general to, as quickly as possible, bring an indictment against both Jim Comey and Letitia James. There was an issue in terms of the statute of limitation running out with James Comey, and so it basically had to be brought. I'm not sure exactly what the date was. As I said, the news just broke. We weren't planning on covering this, but I know the statute of limitations was very imminent. It had to either be brought or be lost, and so Comey has now been indicted, clearly preceded by a direct order from Donald Trump to Pam Bondi to have Jim Comey indicted, and it came from a prosecutor who Trump personally appointed, who is a former personal lawyer of Donald Trump and who had never previously been a prosecutor. Now, to the extent that we understand, that we know the details, as I said, they pertain to statements that Jim Comey made with respect to the 2016 Russiagate investigation, and at least part of it relates to some extremely credible suspicions that during the course of the 2016 Russiagate investigation, which was obviously taking place during the election, the 2016 election, that the FBI, under Jim Comey's leadership, leaked information about the investigation to the media. And then when asked by Congress and when asked by investigators whether he either leaked himself that information or authorized his subordinates to leak it, James Comey vehemently denied that he was involved in any such leak. And according to Kash Patel and others, information has recently emerged, evidence has recently emerged, including in some of those documents that were declassified by Tulsi Gabbard concerning the Russiagate investigation that seemed to suggest, if not outright demonstrate, that Comey lied, that in fact he did participate in some way in those leaks, which he denied any participation in, and that was at least part of what this indictment alleges. Now, here's a summary of what was likely to be the James Comey indictment. This comes from Yahoo News earlier today, but this was about 4 hours before the indictment itself was confirmed. And the headline was James Comey indictment, why Trump's new prosecutor is reportedly, quote, racing to charge the former FBI director. And here's what the article says, quote, a new federal prosecutor handpicked by President Trump is reportedly moving quickly to secure an indictment of former FBI Director James Comey on charges of lying to Congress. According to multiple reports, Lindsay Halligan, who was sworn in Monday as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, is preparing to ask a grand jury to indict Comey just days after Trump publicly urged Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute him and other perceived political adversaries, including Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Trump's appeal came after Halligan's predecessor, Eric Siebert, resigned in response to pressure from the president to bring charges against Comey and James. Trump then nominated Halligan, a White House aide who has served as his personal lawyer and had no prosecutorial experience, to replace Siebert. The New York Times reported on Wednesday that Halligan is now, quote, racing to present a case against Comey, quote, even though career prosecutors determined there was insufficient evidence to indict him. If Halligan's indictment goes forward, it will reportedly accuse Comey of lying to Congress on September 30th, 2020, the day he denied under oath that he was involved in leaking information from the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation. The 5-year statute of limitations on that charge will lapse on Tuesday. So that's the statute of limitation issue. 5 days from now, the 5-year statute of limitation on lying to Congress will elapse, meaning they had to indict him now or they wouldn't ever be able to indict him on that charge. That is at least part of the charge that was made. Now, one of the reasons why I find this so ironic is because one of the reasons I find and have long found Jim Comey to be one of the most deceitful and sinister forces in American law enforcement, all accompanied by this very self-righteous posture of probity and nobility that he assumes and that the media love to promote, is precisely because he has brought so many dubious prosecutions, either against people who were quite famous, and he thought if he brought down a rich and famous person like Martha Stewart, his career would be advanced, or against political adversaries like Michael Flynn, who was indicted on a very similar charge to the one that James Comey now faces, ironically. In the case of Martha Stewart, I'm not going to go into great detail. There's a documentary on Netflix. I believe I've recommended it before about Martha Stewart, and it has a long section on how she was prosecuted and why she was prosecuted. Essentially, the charge was that despite being worth close to $1 billion, her net worth, that she sold stock in a company the day before it basically imploded, and it saved her or made her about $40,000, which, as she kept insisting, was essentially pocket change to her. And it wasn't even her who made the sale or the sale recommendation, but her broker while she was on vacation. And James Comey saw an opportunity to bring down a very big, wealthy person and personally presided over that prosecution. And she wasn't actually even charged with insider trading. She was charged with, and this is why it's ironic, making false statements to investigators about the investigation. So he had this investigation, couldn't prove that she did insider trading, and so resorted instead to indicting her on making false statements to investigators and therefore obstructing justice. She ultimately was found guilty and went to jail for about 6 months. But the far worst case for me was the prosecution of General Michael Flynn, where in the transition after Donald Trump won the election, but before he was inaugurated while the Obama administration was still in office, Michael Flynn, who was the incoming national security advisor, did what you would hope a national security official would do in the transition, which was he picked up the phone and called his counterparts in other governments to introduce himself. And in the case of Russia, which at the time was obviously at the center of everything, that was the peak of the Russiagate investigation that Jim Comey was overseeing, called the Russian ambassador, called other Russian officials and said, look, I know relations have been very bad between the US and Russia. There were just new sanctions announced. Don't panic. Don't retaliate. Once we get into office, we want to see if we can smooth over relations and get along better. A perfectly, not just benign, but I think justifiable attempt by the incoming national security advisor. Unbeknownst to Michael Flynn, the NSA and the FBI were eavesdropping on that call that he was having with the Russians. And so they knew exactly what Michael Flynn said on the call. And then 2 months later, the FBI summoned Michael Flynn or asked Michael Flynn for an interview. And Michael Flynn, thought he'd done nothing wrong and he was happy to talk to the FBI. And they basically asked him, what did you say? What did he say? And because his recollection wasn't perfect, the FBI said, oh, we caught you in a lie. We caught you making false statements to us, the investigators. You didn't recount the call exactly as we know it happened because we were listening and we had the transcript. They kind of got him into a perjury trap, indicted him, threatened that if he didn't plead guilty, they were also going to indict his son. And that was when Michael Flynn ended up pleading guilty. I did a whole 90-minute mini documentary on the fraud of that indictment, but that was Jim Comey using exactly these kind of tactics, saying, we can't prove you actually committed an underlying crime, so we're going to charge you with making false statements as part of the investigation. A lot of the Russiagate prosecutions under Robert Mueller were not about the underlying crime. In fact, he brought no indictments on the underlying crime, which was supposedly collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. Instead, it was these kind of process crimes, like, oh, you lied to us in the interview, you gave us false information. And so to watch Jim Comey now be kind of hoisted on his own petard is rather satisfying. I can't opine on the strength of the case because I haven't seen the indictment, let alone the evidence that supports it. An indictment is just an indictment. But I absolutely think Jim Comey is a very corrupt law enforcement official. I've long thought that. I absolutely thought that in the way he presided over Russiagate and the claims he made about it afterward. Once Tulsi Gabbard declassified all of those files on Russiagate and the investigation, there was a lot of evidence that key national security advisors in the Obama administration, including former CIA Director John Brennan, did make a lot of false claims, radically false claims about fundamental questions when it came to the Russiagate investigation. So the fact that the grand jury was active enough to reject one of the charges and indict him on two others shows that they were thinking somewhat critically. I do think there's some evidence to suggest that James Comey made false statements about that investigation, whether that rises to the level of criminality, whether these career prosecutors who said you'll never get a conviction will be vindicated, or whether Donald Trump is actually correct, that there's a lot of evidence to justify this indictment and he will be convicted. That remains to be seen. We'll have to see the process. We'll obviously report on it as more is known. Right now, all we know is the indictment itself. But we thought it was very important to give you the context for what happened here. I do think we should not just dismiss the fact that we should consider it disturbing for a president to personally order the attorney general to prosecute people, including people he obviously regards as political enemies. There is that issue I think is important, but that is a separate question from whether James Comey actually broke the law, deserves to be indicted, deserves to be prosecuted and convicted. Presumably this prosecution will now go forward, and so we will see soon enough, and we will certainly report on all of it as more evidence emerges. Okay, so I know, and I know that you all know too, that we all have two different ages, our actual age and then our body's internal biological age. What I didn't know is I've likely lowered my biological age without even knowing sometimes, because here's the thing. Because Americans eat so many processed foods and not enough fruits and vegetables, many, perhaps most people are 10 plus years older on the inside than their actual age. They're ticking time bombs. A major university study suggests how to slow aging and diffuse that biological time bomb. Participants slowed their aging by drinking Field of Greens. That's it. They didn't change their eating, drinking, or exercise, just Field of Greens. I often take a Field of Green when I'm having trouble hitting my vegetable targets or my fruit targets, and it makes me feel great. It's the benefits of healthy eating in an easy and convenient way. Eating fruits and vegetables in Field of Greens was doctor selected for specific health benefits. They focus on cell health, hearts, lung, kidney, metabolism, even healthy weight. Field of Greens has been a sponsor of ours almost from the very beginning of our show, one of our oldest and longest sponsors. I feel great knowing Field of Greens can slow how quickly I'm aging, and I encourage you to join me in that. Swap your untested fruit, vegetable, or green drink for Field of Greens while there's time. Check out the university study and get 20% off when you use promo code Glenn at fieldofgreens.com. That's fieldofgreens.com, promo code Glenn. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.